John Hook's Newsmaker Saturday starts now.
Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker Saturday. Our guest this week is a five-term congressman from Arizona, Republican David Schweikert. He represents CD 6 now. Used to be 5.
Used to be 5. But look, I have the greatest congressional district you can possibly imagine.
It's Northeast Valley.
Northeast Valley, Carefree, Cave Creek, Fountain Hills, all the way to 43rd Avenue, the Fort McDowell tribal community, the Salt River tribal community, and Scottsdale. So, I mean, if you were ever to ask for a district with a freeway running through the spine, I mean, even just today, 6 different visits at different businesses and stuff through the community.
Are you in full campaign mode right now?
No. No one's paying attention, other than just sort of the chattering class, which is sort of what we are. No one cares. Most people are actually living their lives. A year from now, some will care.
Let me ask you already, as we're taping here on Friday afternoon, we've got a provocative situation going on in the Strait of Hormuz. 2 British tankers seized by Iranian authorities in the Strait of Hormuz, which was a huge shipping lane, obviously, for oil. What do you make of this move? What do you think is going on? What's the end game?
Yeah, first off, it's more complicated. We've had briefings on the Iranian government, and the fact of the matter, it's not a cohesive government. You have fractions all trying to look tough to each other, to trying to gain dominance.
Including the Republican Guard. They're kind of a splinter in a way.
And there's a splinter on a splinter on a splinter. So be careful. We often sort of see it through Western lenses.
That's a great point.
And there's also, just take a step backwards and think about how disciplined the U.S. Reaction has been so far. You know, how many, even a couple weeks ago, when we lost one of our drones, immediately wanted to start firing missiles. And that didn't happen. It was just...
By the way, on that, it did cross my mind, obviously, that the reason we didn't react is because we were using that drone to spy on Iran, that we strayed into their airspace. You don't believe it?
No, it didn't go into their airspace.
You're sure?
I'm very comfortable with that. Every bit of briefings we've had is, the maps are the maps.
And that's what these drones are for.
Yeah, but that's fine. We all use technology to watch each other. In some ways, real live information keeps there from being conflicts. It's sort of gossip and rumor that actually creates
so you're saying it verifies the truth.
And it actually keeps us safer. So the British are our allies. They're very close allies. They're very capable in open water. You know, in Persian Gulf, they have ships there. But stay relaxed, because in some ways, it's the very reaction that the factions in Iran want from us.
How big of a deal is it that we are not importing a lot of oil from the Middle East?
You're brilliant to bring that up. Think about if this were happening 15 years ago or 20 years ago, when so much of our hydrocarbons came through the Persian Gulf. Today, we don't need any of it.
So we have strategically upped our game.
We are much
We're in a better spot.
Safer as a continent.
Do you credit President Trump for this?
Yes, and also I credit a lot of really smart people that built. It's once again another proof of concept of technology in the extraction of hydrocarbons. Remember, it was only like 15 years ago. You and I would do stories on what they called peak oil. The world is running out of hydrocarbons. Calculations today, we have more known hydrocarbons today than any time in human history.
This is why you voted in favor of drilling on the continental shelf, right? You said, let's do it. Well, let's extract it.
But remember, our ability to do it incredibly safely in a postage stamp, but it also shows no one's running up there, whether it be Anwar or even out to deep water rigs. No one's doing it because now we've gotten so good at pulling hydrocarbons out of the ground safely. And now with some of the new technology, remember,
fracking, shale.
Oh no! I need you to go to even alternative generation, photovoltaic, wind energy, the ability now even to run coal and gas facilities with no smokestack, where we do 100% carbon sequestration. And these plants are up and running and about to grow dramatically. Think about that. Just the technology is the revolution in both keeping us energy independent, but also protecting the environment.
I want to get to, there's so much going on in Washington, but I've got to take a brief couple of minutes to talk about what's kind of encircled your office with some of these allegations of using official resources to benefit your campaign or pressuring staff to perform political activity. I just want to tick them off. And first of all, Oliver Schwab, he was
my former chief of staff.
There was a story about the Super Bowl tickets. He got 6 of them, I think the tune to $6,000, a 6-day trip to the Super Bowl in 2015 in Arizona. Impropriety there?
Don't know, and that's one of the things they're looking at. Oliver was very smart. I actually think it will turn out fine, but that's actually what the committee looks at.
The other things that they're looking at, I mentioned using official resources to benefit your campaign or pressuring staff to perform political activity. Doesn't staff perform political activity every day?
Actually, no, that's actually, and you're going to actually probably see in about 60, 90 days, this all just saying that didn't happen. I think in all my years in office, I've probably had only one afternoon where anyone on staff ever went out and walked door to door with me. They've never collected petitions. They've never.
So they're there for constituent reasons, not campaign reasons?
It's never something I've asked. Look, I'm one of the only members of Congress who's gone his entire term and never asked for reimbursements. You know, so
you're not worried about any of this?
Please understand, where did this come from?
I believe it was a Democratic activist in Scottsdale launched the probe. Right?
A Democrat activist filed the complaint from a story from a fired employee. We fired an employee a few years ago who was very angry at my chief of staff and spent lots of time trying to knife him. I think it's going to be, every tell I've gotten, and I've actually seen some preliminary stuff, it's going to be fine.
Okay, one more. May have received loans or gifts from a congressional employee.
Yeah, and that's absurd.
No. Okay, let me run one more by. Omitted information from your annual House Financial Disclosure Statement and Federal Election Commission candidate committee report.
Can I give you an example of that? I have student loans from when I went back to grad school. I marked down the amount and Sally Mae. Turns out Sally Mae changed their name. I didn't put the right name on. I put the old name. That's how petty this has become.
Does all of this, when this stuff starts getting in the press, you know the game.
Mm-hmm.
You've got 3 Democratic challengers already who are aligned to face you in this election. Do you worry that it makes the lift heavy? You won last time. I think you had 61% of the vote.
Actually, it doesn't really. This becomes sort of the propaganda type of noise in our society. And yes, the chattering class will chatter, but the fact of the matter is the math is still the math. And if you actually even look at some of the polling coming out of Arizona, particularly even for ourselves, our numbers right now are stronger than they've
even with
been.
Hero Tippernini, who's a very capable woman who ran on the west side and lost. She's now challenging you as move to this district.
And I will make you a prediction. She doesn't even come close to winning the Democrat primary.
Because she's too much of a centrist?
No, she's not from the district.
Do you worry about a challenge from the right coming?
No, I mean, that would actually be a fairly absurd. And you can sort of tell whenever you get these sorts of questions, no one has actually seen any polling.
No, I haven't. I haven't.
How do I find a nice way to reassure you? Numbers are really good.
Okay, so you're in good shape.
Yeah, that's the least of our worries. My bigger worry right now is just keeping my sanity. No, I'm dead serious.
I think we're all in that boat.
Well, look,
with what's going on in Washington.
And understand, you're living in an environment where, as you and I just talked about, or what's happening in Washington, or even a station like this, everything is weaponized right now. You're living in a time where there's the professionally offended constantly pounding on you. And whether more print media survives on how many clicks they get. That's how they fund themselves. So every time someone sends a story...
Not good for democracy, you don't believe?
It's not good for democracy as long as people don't understand their rage is the tool for them to make money. It's a business model.
Thank you for the segue.
It's a business model.
I want to go into the story on President Trump this week. The tweeting, the backlash. I want to get your take on this and the temperature in Washington. Take a look.
President Trump taking aim at progressive Democratic congresswomen a day after drawing significant criticism for a series of tweets that many deemed racist. The president suggesting lawmakers, all but one of whom were born in the United States, go back to the countries from which they came.
It is absolutely racist and un-American. And it is an old trope Go back to where you came from.
And on Monday, the president doubled down with a series of new tweets critical of the Congresswoman again, also telling reporters his original tweet was not racist.
These are people that, in my opinion, hate our country. Now, you can say what you want, but get a list of all of the statements they've made. And all I'm saying that if they're not happy here, they can leave.
Some of his allies on Capitol Hill say they stand with the president, but they're calling on him to take the high road and stop his war of words.
Aim higher. You don't need to. They are American citizens. They won an election. Take on their policies. The bottom line here is this is a diverse country.
The new conflict comes just days after President Trump defended House Speaker Nancy Pelosi from those same congresswomen, leading some experts to suggest he may have overplayed his hand with this latest series of tweets.
If he hadn't tweeted this latest thing, it would have been interesting to see that he was a defender of Nancy Pelosi, put her in a very awkward spot. She's very comfortable now moving back to, well, the Republicans are racist.
House Democrats say they are preparing a resolution that would officially condemn the president's tweets.
And of course, that resolution.
Yep.
Yeah, it went to the House floor, and I mean, here we are.
But in many ways, you were just even that video clip is a brilliant example of the theater. Come on, how much of that had anything to do with what's really important for the country, the public policy, the dealing with the mathematical reality?
No, it has a lot to do with 2020.
It's all about, it's actually I'm even more cynical than that. It's not just the next presidential election, next election cycle. For a lot of the media apparatus, it's how they make money. I need something, and I'm sorry, I know I don't want to get too close to home.
No, please. I mean, people are aware of this.
But there is this world out there where I need something to generate rage, so I get clicks, so I get viewerships, and I really think there's an awakening in the public of realizing their rage button is being pushed to make money. It's a business model.
And
now.
that people will eventually get desensitized to it and it won't work. It won't be effective.
Look, we could have an honest conversation and say, why don't, the British media model is, this is a Tory paper, this is a Labour paper, this is, at some point, do we step up in particularly our cable media and others and just have an honest conversation?
And just reveal your cards.
And just say, stop pretending you're in the middle. Because you and I know in a back room someplace, someone's looking at an algorithm saying, hey, if we say Trump's name so many times in a broadcast, we get this many clicks.
That might work for Fox and CNN equally.
Well, or MSNBC or
Sure.
others. But at what point do you have an honest conversation with the viewing public saying, hey, we are systematically using data to manipulate you?
Okay, one more thing before we take a break. They want me to go to break. I want to show tape number 3 if we can. This is the squad. Now, you've been there 10 years, right?
9.
9 years. Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Ariana Presley, Rashida Tlaib. Let's put up tape 3. These women have gotten more press in the last 6 months than you've gotten in 10 years. Yeah. Think about that.
It's what happens when those of us who do our best to actually do our work, and then there's those who are willing to say outrageous things because you raise lots of money, you get lots of press coverage, the more outrageous you're willing to be.
Do you believe that's where the Democrat Party is right now?
I believe it's where their activists are. And I know that, look, a lot of my buddies, one of my best friends is a Democrat congressman from California. And he's a classic liberal.
Who is this?
Let me not hurt him.
Okay.
But he's incredibly frustrated in a world where he thinks he's going to lose his primary to someone who's in the rage business, because that's where they're dragging the Democrat Party.
Let's take a break right there. Congressman David Schweikert is our guest, Arizona District 6, Republican. He lives in Fountain Hills. That's kind of his area, his district, his neighborhood. We're back in a minute with Congressman Schweikert on Newsmaker Saturday. Back with Arizona Congressman Republican David Schweikert, seeking a 6th term in the U.S. House of Representatives. We're going to leave Trump now because we've got some serious issues in this country. I do want to touch on the ICE roundup last weekend. People called it a roundup, and I corrected people on Facebook. I suppose if you what I objected to was mass deportation. This was 2,100 people nationwide who'd had their day in court. They've been ordered out of the country to leave the country and had refused to do so. But this doesn't strike me as jackbooted thugs coming through the streets of, and Phoenix, by the way, wasn't even on the list.
Look.
There's some intellectual dishonesty going on here.
Welcome to our modern world right now. Let's drag the conversation even back to the previous segment. How much of the discussion about ICE doing its job was purely political?
All of it.
Purely about sounding shrill, sounding over the top, excited, getting you to watch. And yet, if you actually look at the numbers of
2,100 nationwide is not a big number. This goes on every day quietly.
Exactly. That number wasn't really different than every day from the Obama.
Trump made a deal out of it for political reasons, and the Democrats made a deal out of it.
But if you're going to be intellectually honest, think about the math and what was happening in 2014 to 2016. We actually had similar numbers at the border. We had similar numbers in holding areas, similar numbers, and yet the rhetoric is dramatically separate. There was actually an amusing moment last week in the Judiciary Committee where they put up these pictures of these horrible cages.
They were pictures from the Obama administration.
Exactly.
I remember, I saw it.
And there was outrage in the committee and saying, you do understand, this is the Obama administration. We're living in a time of theater. And the theater is, if I can say certain things, I can raise money off.
Okay.
If my opponent, we got to be more honest about this.
I agree. Let's go to something you're involved in, which affects a lot of people. This is tape 8. You are taking on Valley Fever, trying to get government funding to get a cure.
I have an absolute fixation.
Take a look at the graph, Congressman. What's happening? Why are we seeing a bigger spike? And was it, I have a theory, the downturn and a lot of land that had been disturbed that was foreclosed on, never got developed, stirring up the desert during the absolute meltdown that we had in the housing crisis, that may have caused some of these cases.
And not to geek out on you, the data's more complicated. We've actually had one of the few patterns we know we can find is a wet year, about a year to 2 years later, we'll have more spores in the soil.
Okay.
So now you'd have to overlay weather patterns with that. You'd have to overlay dust storms with that. You'd have to overlay
What is it you're trying
events.
to do?
I'm trying to come up with, first, a vaccination. We also believe there may be some pharmaceuticals out there that can actually help purge or kill the fungi in the body. Remember, Valley fever is a fungi in the soil.
Right.
It's pandemic here in Maricopa, Pima County, Pinal County, and actually
Jeff in the
California.
studio just moved here.
Thank you for putting that up.
And he will at some point, if he lives here long enough, he'll get this.
And look, you and I who've lived here as long as we have, we've had it.
We've had it.
And
I'm
I'm also a severe asthmatic, but right now, one of the great things, we actually have a vaccine trial for canines, for our dogs, going on right now. We're going to have to wait till probably almost 3 years worth of data from it. But if it works, we know we're on the right path. And the concept of a vaccine for a fungi is a big deal. And it's one of my successes. I think we've moved $94 million into this orphan disease because it actually has a huge economic effect on our valley.
Good thing that, it's a good, bad thing, but California is affected by this. You've got a lot of votes in Congress in California, so you've got
it
allies
helps. And as I've worked on this, I've been able to expand those folks in the Valley Fever Caucus. Last bit, we believe for every 3 people that present themselves in an emergency room or hospital believing they have pneumonia,
yes,
one of them actually has Valley fever.
We've had 2 people in this television station recently contract it. And it was misdiagnosed originally every time.
And it's a bigger deal than just feeling like you have the flu. There's a small portion that gets something called undifferentiated. My neighbor, who's a Vietnam helicopter pilot, his hands are carved up. They have to cut the spores out of his bones.
Oh, man.
So you need to understand. I met a young man. It has dissolved his spine.
Wow.
It is a big deal.
So you're working on that. All right, let's talk about the debt and deficit. I know you're a budget geek. You were the former county treasurer, so you know about this stuff.
It is.
Can we show the national debt clock? 22 trillion. Are you serious?
Now,
I remember when we hit $1 trillion and it was a big deal.
Now, understand, where is most of the debt coming from? And this is where, and I've had presentations where I'm talking to Republicans, Democrats, others, and all of them are unhappy with the math and the truth. The next 10 years, 91% of the growth in debt, and that means in 10 years we expect around a $2 trillion a year debt. 91% of that growth is just Social Security, Medicare, and the healthcare entitlements. Over the next 30 years, this number, please absorb this. Over the next 30 years, if I remove Social Security and Medicare, the budget is $16 trillion to the positive. We have $16 trillion in the bank. That chart's a little out of date, but that one says $23 trillion.
Okay, tell me
so
what
we
we're
have money in
seeing
the
on
bank.
this chart.
So if you take a look, what we're trying to make the point is, and the updated math is, in 30 years, we have $100 trillion in debt from the cash shortage that's in Social Security and Medicare and the interest costs. It's a demographic issue, and demographics aren't Republican or Democrat. It's the fact of the matter is we have 74 million baby boomers who are moving into their benefit years. There is a way for us to keep our promises, to provide that retirement security. But every day, the clown show in Washington avoids stepping up and dealing with the reality. So think about, even in this interview, those numbers are the single biggest issue, I believe, in the economic survival and the retirement security of this society.
Nobody talks about it.
And instead, we talk about a tweet. This is actually easy, shiny. It's the shiny object theory.
Of course.
This is
the
painful
problem
in part.
is, Congressman, is that the people, you and others, have to worry about the next 2-year election cycle. So nobody's looking at the long game.
Look, I'll make the argument. I'm blessed to represent both the majority of my Democrats, Republicans, Independents, I think are freaky smart. I represent, let's face it, the Scottsdale, North Phoenix, those areas. I deal with people that actually understand the reality of the math. And my passion is, I think I'm making some progress in explaining you no longer, entitlement reform, senior options, those things don't get you anywhere near the numbers you need.
What is it going to take?
You're going to have
We've got 2 minutes.
You're going to have to grow the economy at a breakneck speed. And that means dealing with talent-based immigration, trade so it works, a tax system that maximizes economic expansion, the embracing of disruptive technology. There's technology on the cusp that can crash the price of healthcare. So instead of the stupid conversation we've had for decades now of Democrats want to know who gets subsidized and who has to pay in healthcare, and Republicans want to know who gets subsidized and who has to pay, how about crashing the price of healthcare? Something you blow into.
But so many people are employed in the healthcare industry in this country. I mean, if that crashes, then you've got unemployment issues.
Everything goes through disruptions. There's a reason you didn't go to Blockbuster Video last weekend.
Okay.
And then the other things have to do about labor force participation. How do you get folks to participate in the labor force? Whether it could be...
We've got that right now.
Well, we still have problems. We have a real problem with millennial males, but how do you also design the benefits so seniors actually, if they're physically want to, can stay in the labor force?
We've got less than a minute. Can you raise the age that you get Social Security and try to delay that for people getting on the system now?
Social Security already has age movement in it. It's Medicare.
Medicare is a big problem?
Medicare, as you saw in that previous chart, is the vast majority. So what happens is the intellectually lazy often want to talk about Social Security. You and I can fix Social Security in about 20 minutes. It's Medicare that is...
Who's talking about this in the election?
No one, because I believe the political class has lied for so long, saying, well, if we just tax the rich more, or if we get rid of waste and fraud, none of that's true. The numbers are off the charts.
I sure appreciate you coming down.
No,
Good to see
happy
you.
to.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Congressman David Schweikert, Congressional District 6, Arizona. We're back in a minute on Newsmaker Saturday. Thank you, Congressman.
Happy to do it.
Always good to see you. Thanks to Arizona Congressman David Schweikert for being our guest this week on Newsmaker Saturday. And if you'd like to, reach out, I'd love to hear from you, your thoughts on the program. Fox 10, John Hook, it's easy, Facebook, Twitter, and I'd love to hear from you. We will see you next week on Newsmaker Saturday.